This is part one of a two-part deep dive into one of Gordon Lightfoot's songs. The second part of this episode will be released at a later date. I hope you enjoy the conversation between me and my guest. Thank you in advance for listening.
The first guest of the evening is truly a poet. He's an artist. He is a friend and an inspiration to anyone who has ever played the guitar or tried to write poetry. Would you please welcome Gordon Lightfoot?
Oh, the prairie lights are burning bright. The Chinook wind is a-moving in. Tomorrow night I'll be Alberta bound. Though I've done the best I could, my old luck ain't been so good. Tomorrow night I'll be Alberta bound. This is Carefree Highway Revisited, the show that celebrates the work of Gordon Lightfoot song by song, with all episodes available at www.lightfootpodcast.com. I'm your host, Mike Messner, and along with me today is a fellow Lightfoot fan from Nova Scotia, making his second appearance on the program, Jack Ward. Jack, great to have you along again today, and Happy New Year.
Oh, Happy New Year to you too, my friend. It's such a joy that you asked me to do this again. I love talking Lightfoot and I love talking with you. So I hope you had a great holiday and I'm looking forward to getting into this song.
Well, the feeling is very mutual about all of the above. You wanted to talk about Alberta Bound, and I wanted to know what turns you on about this song in particular.
I love traveling, although my current and best wife, as I like to call her, she's not much of a traveler. So my traveling days may be far behind me, but I did a lot of traveling. There was a Canadian program, I don't know if it's still running, but it's certainly running in a diminished version if it was, called Katimavik. It's a youth program for the ages 17 to 21. You would sign up, and when I was doing it, it was a 9-month program where you would spend 3 different sessions, 3 months at a time, with 11 other people your age in a house in different places across Canada. So you had 4 people from Quebec, 4 people from Ontario, a couple people from the East, a couple people from the West. And you were there to work as sort of ambassadors of young Canadians and working on various different projects. So you might be helping local libraries with book stuff. You might be helping the Y. You might be building park benches downtown. You would do all this stuff. And the thing was, they paid for all of your travel. You were paid only $1 a day. Everything else was taken care of. You learned skills so that out of the 12 of you, 2 of you would stay behind every week and do all the laundry and all the making of the food. And you had to learn budget stuff and the whole bit. And 3 months had to be spent on a coast. 3 months had to be spent in Middle Canada. And 3 months had to be spent in a French-Canadian community. So I was in Cheneville, Quebec for 3 months. I took the military option at the time, which meant I had 3 months basic training in the Navy in Esquimalt, Vancouver Island. And then I ended up in Regina, Saskatchewan. So I got the best of both worlds. And at the end, if you make it through the 9 months, you would get $1,000. Now, this is back in 85, 86. It was a fair chunk of change. Everything was taken care of. I got out of high school and the whole bit. Anyway, it's leading up to the fact that when I was done, I cashed in my flight home. So I had about $1,350 on me, and I went to Expo 86. So I hitchhiked back from Regina to Vancouver with my girlfriend at the time. And then I hitchhiked all the way back home to Ontario after that, which, if you don't know, that's a long trip. That's probably like going from Seattle to Chicago. Or even further. Like, it's over a week if you drove it. So it was a very interesting road, and I caught myself listening to Alberta Bound a couple of times. At one point, I was out of money, and I was in North Bay area, and I jumped on a bus and got home to Toronto to a friend of mine's, and he gave me a couple of bucks, and I grabbed a train to my home and started my summer job. But I remember listening clearly, both on the radio in some of the places that I was being picked up, the song, and on the bus on the way home, and just feeling like wherever I was, Gordon Lightfoot was keeping me safe, and I was traveling with him. And it was really funny, too, because there are a couple other people like, I don't know if you know who David Wilcox is, or Bruce Coburn. They're both really amazing Canadian artists. They both were doing tours at the same time. And whenever I stopped and met friends at different cities, they took me to the concert. So I saw both of them 3 times on the way hitchhiking back home.
Oh, wow.
Even at my
So the whole
hometown.
idea of going across Canada is really personal to you. I mean, it's your own experience then, right?
100%. I've gone across Canada by bus, by plane, by car multiple times, by train recently with my wife, and walked, as you know, hitchhiked. And my father and I cycled across most of Canada. He cycled all the way across Canada when he retired in his 60s. He would take summer and he would do a whole segment. So I cycled with him and we went across Manitoba to Ontario, and then he did with various different people. So he did with my nephew, Quebec, and he did with another nephew from Manitoba all the way to Vancouver. That took them most of the summer. And then when he got closer to here, we did a week. It took us a week of cycling to get across the Quebec border through New Brunswick to the Nova Scotian border, and then a week to go from the Nova Scotian border to the sea. And his whole point was to put his foot in the Pacific Ocean and the Atlantic Ocean. And then the next couple of years, my own children were so upset that only my eldest son got to go when he was 12 to do this with my father, that he took them all one at a time or a couple at a time to go, and they did all of PEI. So it was a smaller trip, but it was about a week of them just biking around PEI. So he's 85 this year, so he's going to be 86 in June. So.
Oh, wow. And that is a whole series of adventures that he tells his kids and his grandkids, no doubt.
Just for listeners to know, my father just finished his memoir, and I got him to put it up on Amazon. And he didn't want any money for it. So you can buy it as a PDF. I haven't got it as the paper version yet, but it's called Free Range, and it's Jack Ward Sr. I'm reading it with my wife. I know some of the stories, but it's stunning, like what he grew up as in the 1940s. You wouldn't believe some of the stories, like why he's still alive is literally a miracle. He was being chased by a bully at the age of 7, and the bully had an axe and ran into his house because he was crazy. And his grandmother hit the bully 4 or 5 times with a broom. So she's fighting this kid who's swinging at her with the axe. Like, he's just nuts. That was just one of many, many stories. So, yeah, we have a very adventurous family, obviously. So.
And remind us, what's the name of the book?
Free Range? It's called Free Range. Free Range. And it's something like Memoirs of the 1940s or something. But you'll find it, Free Range Jack Ward, if you look it up on Amazon.com. I had trouble with the format, so it might be a little, because I've never done ebooks before. So if it's problematic, keep checking, and I'll keep trying to make sure the format looks really good. But the stories in it are just unbelievably interesting. Yeah.
Very cool. Well, thank you for telling us about that. I can't relate to the song the same way you can, but to me, the song is just so perfectly Gordon Lightfoot. It's about Canada, and we know that he was very loyal to that. He never really left, in the sense that he always lived in and around Toronto. It is a toe tapper, and that's the way that he used to describe a lot of his songs. And the tone of the song kind of comes from his own experience, because as a young man, he was on TV as a square dancer, which for people who have not seen the documentary, that may be a little hard to imagine, but there is footage of him as a square dancer. And so to me, I don't want to say checks all the boxes, but it does embody who he is and what his influences were in so many ways. So that's why I enjoy it. Now, is there a best setting for you to listen to the song? I know for me, it would be driving alone, probably around middle of the day, maybe early afternoon. Both my wife and my son hate country music, so I could never play it for them, except to say, hey, this is the song we're going to be talking about on the show. The best setting for me would be driving somewhere by myself, probably early afternoon. What about for you? What would the ideal setting as the soundtrack to the life of Jack Ward?
I think either driving, like you said, or actually just walking the highways of Canada. I live out in the country now, and I'm not in Halifax proper. I'm back in the country not where I grew up, but very much in the same kind of community where I grew up, and I adore it. And so I walk the paved roads out here in the summertime, and actually even in the winter, I walk through them. So to be able to play it while I'm going along, it's like you said, it's a toe tapper. It keeps you moving the whole bit.
The genesis of the song, from what I could tell, was that I've heard 2 stories about it. One was that Gord was on a bus going to Calgary from, I'm assuming, Toronto, and he met a teenage girl on the bus. Her name was Grace, and she was talking about going home to Calgary. And the song was supposedly written about that person. And that's a great sort of Hollywood way of looking at the way the song got written. He himself said, and I'm quoting directly, "This is a tune about trucking out west to see your girl. It's definitely a winter song, and when it comes to those honeys with a written guarantee to make you smile, well, I just don't do that," unquote. Those were the two stories that I heard about the sort of origins of the song. Did I miss anything?
No, I think you hit it. The only thing that I was thinking of was maybe some of the subtext that's going on, because the story is there might have been some strain to his first marriage and they would divorce. I guess it came out in 72, was it?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so they would divorce in 73. And so there were people suggesting that he was escalating his drinking at this time. Being on the road is not easy for anybody in this time period. When you're as adored as Gordon Lightfoot, I'm sure it would be hard on anybody. Reminds me of John Denver, too, in America, and that what a great guy he was, but so many troubles and so many problems. And so you can see that being an issue. So, like you said, here he is leaving the Toronto coffee house circuit as a full-blown national icon, and the idea of going out to Alberta bound, it's kind of a quintessential part of Canadian culture. Maybe you guys don't understand the United States. There's a huge tension between living in the country or making it big and being a city person. And there's that isolation when you're in the city, because in Canada, we have this really strong connection to nature, kind of like Minnesotans, how close they are into nature and fishing and all that kind of stuff. There's that among all of Canadians, except for those small places where people, I say small, but there are big cities, our big city is Toronto of like 3-4 million people. Well, that's nothing, right? But for us, those are those outposts of modernity. Everywhere else, people feel a real connection to nature. So I can see him trying to escape at that time, because Alberta wasn't as big as it is now. There are some pretty large cities in Alberta and a lot more urbanesque. Back then, it was kind of like a break for him, I'm sure.
You're listening to Carefree Highway Revisited. We'll be right back after a word from a podcast partner or two.
250 and Counting is the podcast that walks you through American history one day at a time.
I'm Mike Messner.
I'm Claude Call.
Join us as we spend just a couple of minutes with you
each day,
telling you about the events that took place exactly 250 years ago on that date.
You'll learn more about the big events
and the small events
that led to American independence.
Look for 250 and Counting in your favorite podcast software.
That's 250 and Counting from Acroasis Media.
In 1942, when the world needed a hero to fight the forces of evil, a woman had the courage to step forward. Her name was Helen Meeker. Her adventures took her across the United States and behind the lines of both the European and Pacific fronts. President Franklin Roosevelt trusted her judgment. Adolf Hitler put a price on her head. And in the face of overwhelming odds, she battled through everything that was thrown at her, dodged death countless times, and challenged the most diabolical figures in history. The star of more than 20 novels, Helen Meeker proved her grit and determination time and time again. And now the Long Highway Players bring the book series to life on the airways. These exciting dramas will place you in the middle of the action, immerse you in riveting drama, plunge you into unimagined intrigue, and confound you with dark mysteries, while giving you the opportunity to live adventures in a time when the fate of the world hung in the balance. Enjoy the exploits of Helen Meeker and follow author Ace Collins's In the President's Service series on That's Not Canon Podcast Network.
I think in the States, there are a lot of outposts of modernity, but I also would like to think that there are people in many pockets of the country that do have a real connection with nature because number one, they're surrounded by it. Number two, they love it. And number three, they want to enjoy it without destroying it. I would hasten to add that there are just as many Americans who would just as soon take what they can for an easy profit rather than try to keep it around for the next generation. But you think about the people who are really close to it. I think of John Muir, who ended up founding the Sierra Club out here after coming to America, and particularly Yosemite from Scotland, and just absolutely falling in love with the place. So I can appreciate that in the abstract, never having seen the kind of extremes that you're talking about within Canada. One day I will, but I haven't gotten there yet.
I hope you do.
Oh,
I look forward to seeing you.
Oh, yeah. And I want to start in Toronto and Orillia because I feel like I need to go and see the Lightfoot Trail and the different monuments to him and so forth, and go to Massey Hall and other places. But when I'm in the different provinces where I've got contacts and listeners, you can rest assured that I will let you know that I'm around and I'll buy you dinner.
Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate it. I am actually going to be going to Massey Hall in this March and watching an American singer, my middle son, Colin, who plays the guitar as well as I do. He asked me to fly with him to Toronto, and we're going to do a fly-by-night and watch Jesse Wells.
Oh, wow.
So, so his only engagement in Canada, as far as I know, is in Toronto at that time. So we already have tickets. He and his girlfriend and I are going to fly out for the weekend and fly right back and see him for just the one night. So very excited about that. So while you're coming for just to chase a Canadian icon, I'm thrilled to see a new American Bob Dylan, I think.
You know, it's funny that you mentioned seeing acts and traveling to do that. My last show was on the director of the Gordon Lightfoot Tribute, and they're on hiatus for the winter for reasons that are very understandable. But their 2026 schedule will probably include Vancouver. So if I can scrape together the money for that, maybe my wife and I will fly up to Vancouver. It will be our first time in Canada, and we'll get to see the band. Definitely worth it. So now is a great time to get into the lyrics because they do kind of illustrate the divides that you're talking about within, I guess I'll call it, Canadian society. Oh, the prairie lights are burning bright. Now, I've never been to Canada, but my understanding is that Alberta, in particular, outside of Edmonton and Calgary, is kind of characterized by plains, the Canadian prairies and the interior plains, so that this is actually a pretty accurate description. Am I right in thinking that?
Yeah, the prairies actually are sort of east of the rocky parts of Alberta, which are that. So they extend into Saskatchewan and Manitoba as well. I remember I was in Saskatchewan during Katimavik, and I was in northern Saskatchewan, not in the prairie part as much, but the sky was so huge. We were watching all night this thunderstorm, and it just looked like fireworks, and we couldn't even hear it. It was so far in the distance. It was just high up in the sky, and it went for hours and hours and hours because we could see so much. So yeah, they're huge, the skies out there.
I think of Montana being the other parallel that we could use, or some of the Great Plains states down here. The Chinook wind is a moving in. Now, this is one that I will freely admit to having had to look up. But Chinook winds in Alberta, if I'm informed correctly, are winds that are down the eastern slopes of the Rockies, the kind of area that you've been just describing. They are warmer than what you'd get in the winter, but they'll also cause sudden gusts. Sometimes the roads will get kind of icy because the snow will be melting. And of course, it's dangerous to be driving through slush. And they can even increase wildfire risk because a spark can drift off into the woods. Anything else I should know or that our listeners should know about the Chinook wind?
It's pronounced Chinook without a CH for those who aren't sure.
I beg your pardon.
So not a problem. It's very interesting because is it Santa Ana? There's certain winds in the south that have sort of similar kinds of things where it changes up the temperature so much. So you can have very, very cold. Oh my goodness, I'm not very up on my Fahrenheit. I think you guys are about the same as when we get to -20, you get to -20 or something like that with
Something
Fahrenheit
like
and
that,
Celsius. Well, just imagine sometimes double that or triple that cold. We can sometimes get down to -55, -60 in northern Alberta and northern Saskatchewan. So if you get that much cold, spit freezes before it basically leaves your mouth. Your eyes can freeze shut, all those kinds of things. So if you're used to that much freezing cold and then warm winds come by, you can get some really sloppy and slippery stuff that people aren't used to. Black ice to no ends. So yeah, it can be very dangerous, but people also can really look forward to it because it's almost like it's coming back to fall again. So it feels like coming home, even if it's for a short time. So that's why it's this reminder of warmer times.
And that makes sense why he would be mentioning it, because this is a significant thing climatically. It's not just, well, there happens to be this breeze. No, this is a serious weather pattern then. Though I've done the best I could, my old luck ain't been so good. And I'm wondering what he means by luck here. This could be luck at gambling, because he's alluded to that in Steel Rail Blues, which I covered on the podcast not long ago. But it could also be that he's been looking for work of some kind in a city. He alludes to Toronto a little later on, because cities, that's where all the jobs are, right? Any other thoughts on what he means by his luck, or could it be either one of those two, or is there a third option?
No, I think that's it. And I think, like I said before, I think there might have been some strain going on in relationships. There's a sense that he did a lot of the circuits. I had a friend of mine, a teacher I knew, older than I, probably past now, who lived in Toronto at the time and saw him weekly. You can imagine sitting around in a little cafe and there's like 15 people there and your person singing in front of you is Gordon Lightfoot. So it's stunning when you think about that, how lucky you are when you have that opportunity. So I think if you're doing those kinds of circuits where you've got small venues and you're doing a lot of performing and stuff like that, it can get exhausting after a while because you're like, oh, here we go again and stuff like that. You know, a change is as good as a break. And I think sometimes you think at this point, he had one big hit in the States, but he wasn't as much the superstar that we know him yet, kind of thing. He was solid in Canada, but I think he was looking to be able to sort of not be as busy as he was in Toronto and be able to do more and enjoy it more.
I think you're right. And in 72, he has Early Morning Rain under his belt, and he has If You Could Read My Mind. And as we're going to find out, the album did outstanding in Canada, and it did respectably in the States, but not as well as it did in Canada. We'll come back to that in a little while. You're listening to Carefree Highway Revisited. We'll be right back after a word from a podcast partner or two.
Radio is so much different than it was in the 80s. We had it all. The music, the movies, the DJs, and morning shows. Back to the 80s Radio is a show from the 80s in podcast form. We bring the memories from that awesome decade back. Join Toscano and Chang every Friday as they take you on a ride back in time, sharing their experiences and laughs. Stop on by and discover some of the wacky things this crazy duo comes up with. They talk about it all, the good, the bad, and the ugly of the greatest decade. Don't miss the greatest 80s podcast in the world. Back to the 80s Radio.
Sanjo, look!
Yes, Zach? Wait, what's that thing you're holding up?
It's a time travel device. We can use it to go back to the past and watch movies.
But we already do that on our podcast, Oldie But a Goodie.
No. On previous episodes, we were pretending to time travel. Now we can do it for real.
Cool, so we can really go back to like the 80s or the 90s?
No, Santo, you're thinking too little. I mean, we could go really far back, like we traveled back over 100 years into the past.
Oh, but Zach, that's so far in the past. Those movies would be old.
Yeah, but, well, the show is called Oldie But a Goodie, so we should probably do old movies.
Oh, that's a good point.
That's right, folks. This year on Oldie But a Goodie, we're going back further than ever before.
Wait, who are you talking to?
We're starting in 1920s, doing one movie from that year, and then moving up to 1921. And we're continuing that until the year 1969.
Nice.
Join our time-traveling journey through cinema by subscribing now to Oldie But a Goodie, out wherever you get your podcasts.
a That's Not Canon Productions podcast.
No one-eyed man could e'er forget the Rocky Mountains sunset. And I think that what that means, again, I've never been to the Rockies, but I have seen sunsets over the Sierras, and I have seen them over the Pacific Ocean, and I have seen them over the Swiss Alps. And I can tell you that even with one eye, no one could ever forget how spectacular those kinds of sunsets are, where the clouds are just at the right level and the light is refracting in exactly the right way, and you can see colors that you'll never see any other place in nature. So have you seen a Rocky Mountain sunset? Can you confirm or deny that it's as spectacular as he made it out to be?
It's fantastic. It is. Most recently, just after COVID, I think it was 2020 or 2021 now, I'm losing my memory, when things opened up again. I was able to get a cheap ticket for my wife and I to go all the way to BC on train.
Okay.
And so that's what we did just that recently. And my wife was from South America. And I remember the first time when we got married here and we're driving to Ontario, and it takes a day to drive to Ontario from Nova Scotia. And we're driving and she's looking at the trees and she goes, "How long do the trees go?" And I'm like, "Oh, darling, a week at least before we lose the trees." Because where she's from, there were basically no trees and everything was really like, there's no mountains or anything like that. So we're in the train car and I've got a lovely window for her to see and she's just enjoying it. And I was reading, and the next thing I know, I hear her gasping and she's talking on the phone to her sister in South America. And we are seeing the sun setting over the mountains. We just crossed over in Alberta to BC, and where we had gone, it was the perfect shadow of the light coming down and shadowing all across this big mountain. And when we got back to Nova Scotia, we would go to the Annapolis Valley, where these little hill stuff, and she would elbow me and she goes, "I used to think those were mountains." So
real mountains, yeah.
It was one of the most impressive sights for her to see that sunset. So
yeah, thank you for describing that. And thanks for adding the personal element of it too. I long to see my next of kin to know what kind of shape they're in. I think he must be talking about his parents in this particular persona that he's taking on. And I think of, did she mention my name? Are the old folks still the same? As I was growing up, when you say next of kin, it was going to be your parents until and unless you got married, and then it was going to be your spouse. This embodiment of Lightfoot, is he talking about his parents?
Yeah, I think so too. I think that's what I read when I got that as well, for that same kind of thing. I wasn't sure, were his parents in Alberta at this time, or was he thinking about the young girl on the bus and her seeing her parents that way? Was he sort of operating through her eyes?
In a way, he was. The impression I get was that he was still being a guy who's going west, but the narrator's family was in Alberta. As far as I know, Gordon's parents were still living in Aurelia or somewhere in Ontario. I don't know if he had or has any family in Alberta, but he might. I just don't know of any. If there are any listeners out there who can set us straight on that, please get in touch via the website.
I know a lot of people will not go to Alberta necessarily, but go even further west to Vancouver or Vancouver Island because it is the most mild. You'll still see flowers out in January and stuff like that in Vancouver and Victoria on Vancouver Island. So a lot of people retire and go to there instead.
I have a slight head start on getting to Vancouver in the next few years because my son is going to be going to school in Tacoma, Washington. So he will be there, and that doesn't get us all the way to the border, but it gets us close. So we could conceivably drive up through Seattle and across the border into Vancouver if we were desirous of doing that while we're up to see him. Although we won't be moving there, he will. But we're going to be seeing him every weekend that there is a football game because he's going to be on the football team. Oh, the skyline of Toronto is something you'll get onto. Again, never having visited Canada, I have no idea what the skyline there is like, and I don't know what it would have been like in 1971, 1972. What's so impressive about the Toronto skyline?
Oh, so I lived in Toronto for a year and a half. I lived out in the Beaches, which is a beautiful area, very famous for its jazz festival that they have in the summertime, very kitschy and fun. There is something incredible about the Toronto skyline because Lake Ontario is right there. And so a lot of people will walk along the boardwalk and look back upon the Toronto skyline and see sunsets and the stars. It wasn't, certainly back then, even as filled up a skyline as it would be today. Back in the 70s, Toronto was a smaller town. They used to call it Cabbage Town, which was funny, and Hog Town. So there are two different towns names for it as well.
Is that because it was a trading center for pork or for produce?
Absolutely, 100%. It was a place where in Lake Ontario, you would get people coming all the way up through the St. Laurent and through the Great Lakes. And so you would get a lot of produce coming in through the sea. And then, of course, you'd have a lot of train stuff back and forth. So it was a central hub for activity. It became really, really popular. You had to hit Toronto. And even now, there's a large station in Quebec City, or Montreal, I should say. But there's a Union Station in Toronto, which is the largest train station for people to move back and forth. And of course, Pearson International is our largest airport there as well, too.
I think of Chicago as maybe being the parallel to that because, of course, you have Lake Michigan and you can go, and I've been on Lake Michigan and looked back at the Chicago skyline, not at sunset, but I have seen the skyline, and it's just phenomenal to look at that. And if you look at the Sears Tower and all the other places that are there in what was called the Crossroads of America or the home of the stockyards, read Carl Sandburg, you'll know everything you need to know about him. But that's maybe the parallel down here in the States. But they say you've got to live there for a while. And it seems like that would be the case for anyone coming into the city after living in some sort of a rural area, which, as we've already established, much of Alberta is rural outside of Edmonton and Calgary and maybe a few other places.
As would have been Orillia. Orillia would have been very rural, would have been a small town at the time.
Okay. The idea is you'd have to get used to living in a big city after having lived in either a rural area or a stereotypical small town like John Mellencamp talked about. It's not something you'd have to get used to Toronto. I mean, any big city that you're moving into. I mean, for us, it would be San Francisco. For somebody in Southern California, it might be LA. For somebody living in Poughkeepsie, it might be New York City, et cetera, et cetera. So it's just going from the small town mentality to the big city mentality, right?
Oh, yeah. It's one of the reasons why I left after a year and a half. I mean, I got a job as a teacher up north a bit, and so I was thrilled to do that. But I was going squarely as someone who lived in a rural area. And then even though it wasn't like deep in the downtown part, the fact that there was never silence. There was always streetcars going and there were people moving back and forth. And yeah, I kind of felt like I was in an ice cube tray at times.
Especially in the winter. I would think.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. And if you've got the money, you can get yourself a honey with a written guarantee to make you smile. Now, I got to think that he's talking about ladies of the evening. And I also have to think that he's being a little sarcastic because although I have no experience with this at all, I don't know about how many sex workers come with a written guarantee. My sense is not too many of them. So I think he's got to be a little bit tongue-in-cheek about that.
I agree.
That wraps up the first part of this episode of Carefree Highway Revisited. The second part of this discussion will be released very soon. I hope you enjoyed this conversation so far and that you'll listen to the second part when it comes out. See you next time.